I'm 79 years old now, and I want to tell you something it took me most of my life to understand. There are things you feel, things you think, things you want to say, but not everything is meant to be spoken out loud, not because it's wrong or shameful, but because once words leave your mouth, they don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the world, and the world doesn't always handle them gently. My name is Eleanor, and when I was young, I believed that honesty meant saying everything exactly as it came to me. I thought being open made me a good person, a trustworthy person. I thought silence was weakness, or worse, dishonesty. It took me decades, mistakes, and a few broken relationships to understand that silence, when chosen carefully, is not weakness at all. It's wisdom. When I was young, I talked freely about everything, especially things that felt heavy on my chest. I believe sharing made things lighter. Sometimes it did, but more often it complicated things in ways I didn't expect. I remember after my husband Thomas passed away, I was 67, suddenly alone, and for the first time in my life, I had to take control of finances he had always managed. I had never paid much attention to numbers before. He handled the accounts, the bills, the savings. I trusted him completely. After he was gone, I sat at the kitchen table with stacks of papers trying to make sense of what was mine now. Insurance, savings, a modest pension. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for me to live without worry. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch with a woman from down the street. We had known each other for years, shared small conversations, polite smiles, cups of tea now and then. She asked how I was managing, and I answered honestly. I told her I was doing okay. I even mentioned the insurance money Thomas had left me. I didn't think much of it. It felt like normal conversation, harmless, just two people talking. Couple of weeks later, her son came to my door. He was polite, almost nervous, but he asked if I would consider helping them with a loan for a house. Just a little help, he said, enough for a down payment. I stood there surprised, not because he asked, but because I suddenly understood how my words had traveled. I had shared something that wasn't just information. It was something people could use. I said no as kindly as I could. It wasn't my responsibility. But after that, things changed. The woman from down the street stopped visiting. When we crossed paths, she was still polite, but something had shifted. There was distance where there used to be ease, and I realized she no longer saw me the same way. I wasn't just Eleanor anymore. I was Eleanor who had money and chose not to share it. That one conversation had quietly redrawn the boundaries of our relationship. It never returned to what it was. That was the first time I understood that some things are better kept private. Not because they're secrets, but because once people know certain things about you, it changes how they treat you. If they think you have more than they do, they may feel entitled or quietly resentful. If they think you have less, they may look down on you or stop taking you seriously. There is no perfect outcome, just different kinds of distance. Later in life, I made another mistake, one that taught me something just as important. I was in my early 60s, still strong, still capable, but starting to feel the weight of maintaining a large home on my own. The stairs felt steeper. The garden felt heavier. I began to think about moving somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. It was just a thought at first, something soft and unfinished in my mind. One evening during a phone call with my son, I mentioned it casually. I didn't present it as a decision, just an idea, something I was considering. But ideas, when spoken out loud, have a way of growing faster than you expect. By the next day, my daughter called, then my other son. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. They were concerned, of course. That's what they said. They asked questions, offered advice, pointed out risks I hadn't even thought about. The house might be worth more if I waited. Moving would be stressful at my age. What about all the memories tied to that place? Their voices filled the space where my own thoughts had been. What had once felt like a simple, quiet possibility became complicated, heavy, almost overwhelming. I began to doubt myself. I postponed the decision, then I avoided it altogether. Not because I had truly changed my mind, but because the clarity I once had was gone. That's when I learned that not every thought needs an audience, especially in its early stages. Some decisions are like fragile seedlings. If you expose them too soon, too many opinions can crush them before they have a chance to grow. Since then, I've learned to hold my plans close until they're strong enough to stand on their own, until they belong fully to me. There was another lesson, one I learned much earlier when I was still working as a school librarian. It was a quiet job, one I loved, but like any place, it had its frustrations. The head administrator was a difficult man. He was slow to respond, quick to criticize, and rarely acknowledged anyone's effort. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating week, I found myself venting to a colleague. It felt harmless, just releasing a bit of pressure. But words don't stay where you leave them. They move. They change shape. They reach people you never intended them to reach. Within a short time, the things I had said found their way back to him. I was never told directly, but I could feel it. The way he spoke to me changed. The delays in approving my requests grew longer. Small things became harder than they needed to be. I couldn't prove it, but I didn't need to. I knew. That experience taught me something simple but powerful. When someone has authority over you, your words about them are never as private as you think. Complaining to others doesn't fix the problem. It just creates a trail that can circle back to you in ways you can't control. If there's an issue, it's better to address it directly or keep it to yourself. Speaking about it carelessly only gives your frustration a chance to turn into something worse. Looking back now, I can see a pattern in all these moments. I spoke because I thought sharing was always the right thing to do. I thought openness would bring connection, understanding, support. Sometimes it did, but often it changed things in ways I wasn't prepared for. It shifted how people saw me, how they treated me, how they understood my place in their lives. If you're younger, you might still believe that saying everything is a sign of honesty. I believe that too. But honesty is not about saying everything. It's about knowing what should be said, when it should be said, and who it should be said to. And sometimes the most honest thing you can do is remain quiet, because silence, when it's chosen with care, doesn't take anything away from who you are. It protects it. I didn't fully understand that lesson until later, when life had already given me enough evidence that not everything needed to be shared. But even then, I still made mistakes. One of the hardest ones to admit was how easily I spoke about my own fears, thinking that vulnerability would always bring me closer to people. I was in my early 70s by then, still adjusting to living alone, still learning how to fill the silence in my home without Thomas's voice in it. Evenings were the hardest. That quiet stretch between dinner and sleep, when your thoughts get louder than anything else. There was a woman I had grown close to during that time. We would meet once or twice a week, sometimes for tea, sometimes just to sit and talk. She was kind, patient, the kind of person who listened carefully. One evening I opened up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone else. I told her I was afraid of becoming dependent on others, afraid of losing my independence slowly, piece by piece, afraid that one day I would need help for the simplest things and that there would be no one there to give it without resentment. She listened, nodded, said all the right things. She reassured me, told me I was stronger than I thought, that I would be fine. And for a while I felt lighter. I thought I had done the right thing by sharing. But over the next few weeks, something changed in the way she treated me. It was subtle at first. She would insist on carrying things for me even when I didn't need help. She would check in on me more often, not out of simple care, but in a way that felt like she was watching me, measuring me against the fears I had confessed. Slowly, I stopped feeling like her equal. I became, in her eyes, someone fragile, someone who needed support, guidance, protection. And maybe she meant well, I believe she did. But the balance of our relationship shifted. I was no longer just Eleanor. I was Eleanor who was afraid, Eleanor who might not manage on her own. And I missed the way things used to be when we simply talked as two people on equal ground. That's when I realized that vulnerability is not something you offer freely to everyone. It's something you place carefully, like something valuable and delicate. Because once people know your fears, they don't always know how to hold them without changing the way they see you. And once that perception changes, it's very difficult to return to what it was before. Around the same time, I was reminded of another kind of restraint, one that has nothing to do with your own story, but everything to do with someone else's. My younger brother, Daniel, called me one evening. He wasn't someone who shared easily, so I knew something was wrong the moment I heard his voice. He told me his marriage was falling apart, not in dramatic terms, not with anger, but with quiet exhaustion. He said they had grown apart, that conversations had turned into silence, and that he didn't know if they could find their way back. He asked me not to tell anyone, and I promised I wouldn't. After that call, I sat in my living room holding that information like it was something heavy in my hands. I won't pretend I wasn't tempted to share it, not out of malice, but out of that strange human urge to talk about things that feel significant, to feel included in something important, to have something to say when conversations drift toward other people's lives. But I didn't say anything, not to my children, not to my friends, not even in passing. I kept it to myself, exactly as he had asked. Months later, he called again. This time, his voice sounded different, lighter. He told me they had worked things out, slowly, carefully, but they had found a way back to each other. If I had shared his struggles with others, even casually, It would have followed them. People would have formed opinions. They would have remembered the worst parts even after things improved. And in doing so, I would have made his path back to his marriage more complicated than it needed to be. That experience taught me that keeping someone's confidence is not just about loyalty in the moment. It's about protecting their future from unnecessary judgment. There was another moment, one that could have changed my own life in ways I'm not sure I would have been able to repair. It was many years earlier, when my marriage with Thomas had reached a quiet, difficult place. There was no shouting, no dramatic arguments, just a growing distance that neither of us seemed able to bridge. We lived in the same house, shared the same routines, but something essential between us had faded. I remember one evening we were sitting across from each other at the dinner table, barely speaking. The silence felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. And in that moment, a thought crossed my mind, one that had been building quietly for some time. I wondered what it would be like to leave, to start over, to step out of that life and into something unknown. The words formed in my throat. I almost said them. I almost told him that I had been thinking about leaving, but something stopped me. I can't explain it clearly. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear of what those words would do once they were spoken. So I stayed quiet. We didn't fix everything overnight. It took time, effort, patience. But we did find our way back to each other slowly in small ways. And over the years, that difficult period became just one part of a much longer, stronger story. I often think about what would have happened if I had said those words that night. Even if I hadn't left, even if we had still worked things out, the knowledge that I had considered leaving might have stayed with him. It might have created a crack in our trust that never fully healed. That's when I learned that some thoughts, especially the ones spoken in moments of frustration or uncertainty, can do more damage than they're worth. You don't announce an ending before you're certain it's what you want, because once you do, you change the foundation of what you're standing on, and it may never feel the same again. There is also something to be said about what we share outside of our closest circles, especially when it comes to family. I remember when my youngest son went through a difficult period in his teenage years. He was angry, distant, constantly pushing against every boundary I tried to set. It was exhausting. There were days I felt like I was failing him completely. I thought about talking to a friend about it. I thought about explaining how difficult things had become, how frustrated I felt. It would have been easy. People share these things all the time. But I stopped myself because I realized something important. If I told someone about him at his worst, that is how they would remember him. Even after he grew, even after he changed, even after we repaired our relationship, they would still carry that version of him in their mind. So I kept it within the family. We worked through it together, slowly, not perfectly, but honestly. And today, when I look at him, I'm grateful I didn't let those difficult years define him in the eyes of others. By this point in my life, I had begun to see a pattern clearly. It wasn't about becoming secretive or closed off. It was about understanding that words have consequences beyond the moment they are spoken. They travel through people, through time, through relationship. They shape how others see you and sometimes how they see the people you love. And once those impressions are formed, they don't disappear easily. By the time I reached my late 70s, I had started to move through life more quietly, not in a lonely way, not in a withdrawn way, but in a way that felt more intentional. I no longer felt the need to fill every silence with words or every thought with expression. I had seen enough by then to understand that what you choose not to say can shape your life just as much as what you do say. There was one lesson, though, that took me longer than the others to truly accept. It was about sharing good news, the things you feel proud of, the small victories that make you feel like life is still giving you something meaningful. You would think those are the safest things to share, that people would celebrate with you, feel happy for you, support you, and sometimes they do, but not always. I remember when I was 72, I decided to take a course at the local community center. It was something simple, creative writing. I had always enjoyed putting my thoughts on paper, but I had never taken it seriously. That class became something very important to me. It gave structure to my days, a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. Over time, I wrote more, shared a few pieces in the group, and to my surprise, people responded warmly. One of the instructors encouraged me to submit a short story to a small local publication. I hesitated at first, but eventually I did. Weeks passed, and I almost forgot about it. Then one morning, I received a letter saying my story had been accepted. It wasn't a big magazine, nothing famous, but to me it meant something. It felt like a quiet achievement, something that belonged to me after years of putting my own interests aside. My first instinct was to tell people immediately, to call my children, to mention it to friends, to share that moment of pride. But I paused, not out of fear, but because of everything I had learned over the years. Instead, I sat with it. I let it settle. I allowed myself to feel proud without needing anyone else to confirm that feeling. A few days later, I shared the news with a close friend, someone I trusted. She was happy for me, genuinely. But even then, I noticed something familiar in others when the news spread. Some were supportive, yes, but others reacted differently. A few became distant. One made a comment about how everyone writes these days, said lightly but not without meaning. Another suddenly began talking about their own accomplishments as if trying to balance something that didn't need balancing. That's when I understood something I wish I had known much earlier. Not everyone knows how to hold your joy without comparing it to their own life. Not everyone celebrates without measuring, and if you share something too soon, before it feels secure inside you, their reactions can shape how you feel about it. So now, when something good happens, I don't rush to announce it. I give it time. I let it become part of me first. That way, when I do share it, it doesn't matter how others respond. Their reactions don't take anything away from it because it's already settled within me. As I sit here now, looking back over the years, I can see how much of my life was shaped by words. The ones I spoke too quickly, the ones I shared too freely, and the ones I was wise enough to keep to myself. Each one left a mark in some way. Some built connections, others quietly altered them. I think about all the moments where silence protected me. The times I didn't reveal something that would have complicated a relationship. The times I held back a thought that might have caused unnecessary harm. The times I kept someone else's trust intact simply by saying nothing at all. And I also think about the relationships that lasted, the ones that remained steady over time. They were not built on constant sharing or complete transparency. They were built on understanding, respect, and a quiet awareness of what needed to be said and what didn't. There is a difference between honesty and exposure. Honesty is about truth, about integrity, about being real in the ways that matter. Exposure is about revealing everything, often without considering the consequences. For most of my life, I confused the two. I believed that being completely open was the same as being honest, but they are not the same. Some truths are meant to be shared, others are meant to be carried quietly. Knowing the difference is something you learn slowly, often through experience, sometimes through regret. If you are younger and listening to this, you may feel the urge to speak your mind about everything, to express every thought, every feeling, every plan. And there is nothing wrong with that in itself, but I hope you learn sooner than I did that words have weight. They don't disappear once they are spoken. They move through your life, shaping how people see you, how they treat you, how they understand your place in their world. If you are closer to my age, you may already know this. You may already have your own moments, your own stories of things said too soon or shared too freely. And maybe, like me, you've come to appreciate the quiet strength of keeping certain things to yourself. I don't believe in shutting people out. I don't believe in building walls so high that nothing can reach you. But I do believe in choosing carefully what you let out into the world. Because once it's out there, you don't get to decide what happens to it next. Silence is not emptiness, it is space. Space for thoughts to grow stronger before they are spoken. Space for emotions to settle before they are shared. Space for you to understand something fully before offering it to others. And sometimes that space is the difference between a moment that passes quietly and a moment that changes everything. I have lived long enough to see how small words can create large consequences, how a single sentence can shift a relationship, alter a perception, or open a door that cannot be closed again. And I have also lived long enough to see how choosing not to speak can preserve something valuable, something fragile, something worth protecting. So now, in the later years of my life, I speak a little less, but I understand a little more. I choose my words with care, not out of fear, but out of respect for what they can do. And I keep certain things to myself, not because I have something to hide, but because I have learned their value. If I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, it would be this. You don't have to say everything to be honest. You don't have to share everything to be understood. And sometimes the most important things you will ever protect are the ones you never say at all. Take care of yourself and take care of your words. They will shape more of your life than you realize.